If you've been following the news, you'll know that the Shiv Sena parliamentary party has imploded. Uddhav Thackeray appears to have lost the majority of his MPs. Now, this is not surprising. It's already happened to Uddhav in Mumbai, where he's lost the majority of his MLAs and therefore his government. Now, there are many views on why this happened, and most views are fairly cynical. That they were lured away with money, they were lured away with position, they were told they'd be given great things by the BJP. Now, I'm not disputing any of that. Perhaps this is true. But there is a more fundamental problem with the Shiv Sena, and that problem has contributed to what's happened over the last month or so. The basic problem is this: can a party that was founded on the politics of grievance make the shift to becoming a responsible political party? Think about it. Think of all the political parties today that are doing well. Nearly all of them have some element of grievance. Let's take the BJP. The BJP under Atal Bihari Vajpayee was a Hindutva party, or a Hindu party certainly, but it was a party that tried to be a responsible, mainstream, consensual party. This avatar of the BJP, on the other hand, is clearly a party with a grievance. You just have to listen to BJP supporters, listen to BJP surrogates, or as we've seen, listen to BJP spokesperson. It'll be all about the injustices done to Hindus over time, the need to reclaim historical monuments, the need to avenge themselves on today's Muslims, because apparently many injustices were done to Hindus hundreds of years ago by the Mughals or whatever. That is the kind of politics that works today. Now, the Shiv Sena should have had an advantage. It's a party that was founded on grievance. In 1967, when the Shiv Sena first came to prominence, it was headed by a man who then later became a household name, Bal Thackeray. Bal Thackeray was a cartoonist with the Free Press Journal who hit upon this idea of standing up for Maharashtrian rights. People, younger people particularly, don't often realize this, but the state of Maharashtra was created only in 1960. Till that point, there was the old state of Bombay, which included much of what we now call Maharashtra and much of what we call Gujarat. The most powerful and well-known chief minister of Bombay was a Gujarati, Morarji Desai. And in many ways, the old Bombay state was dominated by Gujaratis. There was a movement of Maharashtrians against that, and that agitation led to the creation of Maharashtra and Gujarat as separate states in 1960. Many Maharashtrians believed that once Maharashtra had become a state by itself, they would be in clover, good things would happen to them. It didn't happen automatically, and that's where Bal Thackeray and the Shiv Sena saw their opportunity. Bal Thackeray said that his Shiv Sena was a party for Maharashtrians. Even though Maharashtrians now had their own state, they still had not enough jobs, not enough access to employment, prosperity, various other things. So his was a party of grievances by Maharashtrians who felt that they'd been denied their fair share of power, money, prosperity, whatever. It was an interesting position, and it may or may not have taken off, but for two things. The first was that Bal Thackeray actually had the backing of the ruling Congress party. The Shiv Sena was started with the blessings of many of the Congress bosses of that period, S.K. Patil, V.P. Nayak, etc. Their intention was simple. In the 1960s, the communist movement was growing in Bombay's industrial north. Many trade unions were communist dominated. The Congress government believed it needed somebody to take on the communists. It believed that the Shiv Sena was the right vehicle to do that. There was a second factor, and that was, though he seemed, when you met him, to be a mild-mannered fellow who was a cartoonist, Bal Thackeray had a healthy or unhealthy, depending on your perspective, respect for violence. Almost from the beginning, the Shiv Sena was a party that did not abjure violence. I'll give you an example. In 1967, V.K. Krishna Menon, who was a former defense minister of India, was denied the Congress ticket to stand from his old constituency of North Bombay. He stood anyway as an independent. The Congress put up its own candidate and decided to defeat him. Bal Thackeray and the Shiv Sena were enlisted for this effort. Various Shiv Sena goons fanned out around North Bombay and beat up Malayalis, arguing that Malayalis, and Krishna Menon was a Malayali, had come into Bombay and taken away their jobs. If you listen to Bal Thackeray's rhetoric in the old days, it was about Gujaratis, because there was a historical grievance there, who still hadn't given Maharashtrians their due. And it was about South Indians. He used the term Madrasi, unfortunately, for every kind of South Indian, who were denying Maharashtrians their due share of employment. The violence, however, was the key. If the Shiv Sena called a bandh and you did not respect that bandh, you were likely to be attacked. Your car was likely to be damaged. If you were a shopkeeper, you kept your shop open, it may have been burned down. It would certainly be attacked. You would probably be assaulted. So almost from the beginning, people had respect for the Shiv Sena, not because of the nature of its support, but because it was a party that did not hesitate to become violent. In the early days, the Shiv Sena kept on and on with this anti-South Indian campaign. The anti-Gujarati campaign moderated itself slightly, though it never went away. The anti-South Indian campaign was pretty much a mainstay of the Sena. Bal Thackeray would periodically ask South Indians to go back to Madras. This caused a lot of excitement within his supporters and a lot of bewilderment among South Indians, many of whom were Malayalis who had never ever been to Madras and didn't understand why they should be asked to go there. But it made Bal Thackeray a power to reckon with in Mumbai. There was a time in the 1980s when all this Maharashtra for Maharashtrian stuff began to run out of steam. It wasn't that Bal Thackeray didn't believe it. It was just that Maharashtrians were doing much better. There were fewer grievances for Bal Thackeray to exploit. He changed tack then, and the Shiv Sena became anti-Muslim in its rhetoric. People talk about Hindutva like everybody who doesn't like Muslims believes in it. But Bal Thackeray, in fact, had no respect for the RSS. He regarded it as an effete Brahminical organization. He wanted a more muscular kind of Hindu activism, one that was, well, wouldn't you expect it, violent and assertive. He started saying things, and I remember interviewing him a lot during those days, that if you open the newspaper and you read the names of people arrested by the police, you will find there are so many Muslims. I don't object to Muslims. I like Saeed Kirmani. He's a good cricketer. But so many of these Muslims, they're criminals. And there was more in a similar vein, sort of pretty basic Muslim baiting in the hope of creating a divide there. Hindus were said to be, again, the victims of these Muslim criminals. And the sense of grievance was exploited once again. Now, I personally didn't believe that Bal Thackeray meant what he said. I think it was the Maharashtrian stuff he believed in. But the anti-Muslim stuff, I think, was sheer political opportunism for him. But it seemed to work. It seemed to give him a new lease of life. But it didn't really mean that much more than what he had already. That was when Bal Thackeray decided that perhaps he needed to make a serious stab at political power. He had many meetings with Pramod Mahajan, who had emerged as the BJP's go-to guy in Maharashtra. I remember I was at the Centaur Hotel in Bombay when Mahajan and Thackeray once had a meeting with their advisors. I was supposed to interview Thackeray. They told me to sit in the next room and wait, but of course I listened in. Mahajan offered Thackeray a chance to take the Shiv Sena out of the streets and into political office. Why don't you align with the BJP? He said, we have many things in common. We are also anti-Muslim. We have similar platforms. It's something we now take for granted, and the BJP goes on and on about how they are natural allies, but they were not natural allies. The Shiv Sena was a creation of the Congress, and till the end, Bal Thackeray was, well, worshipped may be a strong word, was certainly a strong admirer of Indira Gandhi. He fell out, I remember, during the emergency with S.P. Chauhan, who was the Chief Minister of Maharashtra, who didn't like Bal Thackeray's mentors within the Congress and acted against the Shiv Sena. And though Thackeray hated Chauhan in return, he never ever blamed Mrs. Gandhi for whatever happened. When Mrs. Gandhi was out of power during the Janta phase and she was arrested, Thackeray protested. He really believed she was in many ways the best person for the country. He was even, and this may seem less surprising, an admirer of Sanjay Gandhi. So when the BJP went to him and said, This is a logical alliance. It really wasn't logical at all, but it was convenient. At that stage, Thackeray's mind was made up. He would align with the BJP, but in Maharashtra at least, the Shiv Sena would be the senior partner. The BJP could do what it liked in Delhi, but in Maharashtra, it was the Shiv Sena's sidekick. Mahajan accepted this. The BJP was keen to make headway in Maharashtra, and it worked. The BJP-Shiv Sena alliance won an election, the Shiv Sena kept the chief ministership, and the alliance appeared to be going okay. Then things changed. Thackeray died, and the Shiv Sena had to choose where it was going. It was a battle between Thackeray's nephew Raj and his son Uddhav. Raj was very much cast in the Bal Thackeray mold, whereas Uddhav was relatively mild-mannered, wanted to be known for governance, wanted to turn the Shiv Sena into a mainstream party that everybody could vote for. Neither of them disowned Bal Thackeray's legacies, but it was obvious that there were differences. I'll give you another example. When the film Bombay was released in the 1990s, it focused on the Bombay riots. Those followed the demolition of the Babri Masjid. And the Shiv Sena had an important role to play in those riots. So the film Bombay showed a Muslim leader and a Hindu leader, clearly patterned on Bal Thackeray, shaking their heads, seeing the violence and the destruction and saying, oh my God, we should never do this. And Bal Thackeray objected to the film. He didn't object because he was shown as encouraging the violence. He objected because he was shown as regretting the violence. He said to me then in an interview, why should I regret it? Why should I apologize? I defended the Hindu community. So that was the kind of Bal Thackeray position which perhaps Raj would have taken. Uddhav took a much more reasonable, much more moderate stand. And when Uddhav finally came to power, he had a problem. That the kind of muscular Hinduism that the Shiv Sena supported, which it believed that the RSS had not believed in, was no longer the Shiv Sena's exclusive purview. The Modi-Shah combine had taken over the BJP, and they were as muscular in their Hindutva beliefs, and they were as assertive. So where did they go? The Modi-Shah combine also did not accept Bal Thackeray's old claim that you can be what you like in Delhi, but when it comes to Maharashtra, the Shiv Sena stops. So as the disputes continued about who would be chief minister, initially the BJP had their way. I think Uddhav and the Shiv Sena believed that they owed it to Bal Thackeray to resume the Shiv Sena or recover the Shiv Sena's prominent position. As we know, the alliance broke down. Uddhav Thackeray formed the government, and he took the Shiv Sena away from the path of division, the path of grievance, and tried to run it like a respectable party that worked on the basis of consensus. That, I think, in many ways was his fatal flaw. Yes, of course, the BJP was trying to break the government. Of course, money had been offered. Of course, there were inducements. But essentially, the Shiv Sena's MLAs, people who joined the party when Bal Thackeray was praising the Bombay riots, etc., didn't really understand that kind of governance. They were much happier with the politics of grievance, much happier with the politics of division, much happier with the political policy that blamed, say, the Muslims for imaginary grievances. They didn't really fit into the new style Shiv Sena that Uddhav Thackeray was creating. So when Dev Fadnavis and the BJP kept calling, perhaps with suitcases, perhaps without, we have no proof, so we'll leave it at that. They were very happy to join up with the BJP. They kept talking about Bal Thackeray, and you'll hear a lot of this, we are respecting Bal Thackerayji's wishes. What they mean there is we are respecting the politics of division, and we find that the BJP understands that. So that's left Uddhav Thackeray where he is today. He has no government. His party has split. His party split at the center as well. He's fighting on for dear life. He's fighting to keep his version of the Shiv Sena going. His former members have created a violent, divisive version of the Shiv Sena and are very happy and see no reason to follow his old policies. So I don't know what will happen, but you have to admit that it looks pretty bleak for Uddhav Thackeray. It looks bleak for India as well. What does this tell us? It tells us that if you take the politics of governance, if you take the politics of being responsible, if you try and be consensual, it doesn't always work. In today's India, for better or for worse, the politics of division seems to work even better. And that, I think, is the problem, not just for Uddhav Thackeray, but for India.